like your hymnal, it's number 161, Footsteps of Jesus. Singing. The next one is, we don't have the words for on the screen. It's number 334 in your book, though. And normally when I'm leading singing on Wednesday nights, it's just a plethora of the things that have been on my head throughout the week that I've been singing to myself. And so these three songs have kind of been in my mind throughout the week. And this one's Singing I Go. singing that one? Almost everybody. That's what I thought. I could tell by the intensity by which you were staring at your songbooks. And so it's good to learn a new one. I'm glad I got to teach that one to you. So Nearer, Still Nearer. This one's not in your books, but it will be on the screens. And maybe this will be a new one for you as well. Yeah, actually, we've got to do announcements between this, so go ahead and have a seat. And we've got our baseball game activity this Friday. We'll meet in the parking lot about 4:20 or so, and just head toward the stadium, and hopefully you'll see me and others. And so we'll just kind of meet there, and it will hopefully be a good night. I hear we might have a chance of rain. Hopefully we don't, but we'll see. Just play it by ear, I guess. So I'll try to let you know if there's any changes to that if the game gets rained out. But hopefully we can have a wonderful time there at the ballpark. And then we have our Graduate Sunday this Sunday. If you haven't yet signed up for that, you can still do that tonight and sign up to bring something or sign up to attend. And that'll be a good time there. We'll do our morning service, a lunch, and then the afternoon service right after that lunch, and give you the evening off. And we've got the sign-up sheets for I actually have it up in my office. I was making sure I had all the hotel rooms. But I'll bring that back down on Sunday, so that will be out if you're still interested in signing up for the Ark Encounter and Creation Museum trip that we'll do toward the beginning of August. And VBS will be here before you know it. That's at the end of July. I think it's the 21st to 23rd, I believe, if I'm thinking through that right. And so if you're able to attend that, we'll start having some more info about that here soon. Sign-up sheets for that and things that maybe you could bring. And if you're available to help. And Father's Day is around the corner. We're having, I think it's the same day as Father's Day, we're having Lord's Supper that Sunday evening. And so that'll be here soon as well. And so a lot of things coming up. And I feel like we had a pretty busy past couple months with activities and things. And June is a little bit of a slowdown, although we have that one this weekend, but not a whole lot going on. But July with VBS will be busy enough. So, like I said, we'll turn our Bibles to Genesis. We'll get you a head start on that, Genesis chapter number 31. But Nearer, Still Nearer is the song that we're going to sing. was your first time singing that one? About the same. That's what I thought. Man, I don't know that everyone knows this one either. So good. You've learned 2 new ones. And now you know the variety of songs that pass through my head throughout the week. But here we are in Genesis chapter number 30. We had 2 really fast ones, 1 really slow one. And the problem is when a song gets stuck in my head, I don't know about you, I don't know all the words memorized, okay? So it's just like I'm repeating the same phrase over and over again half the time and kind of humming the rest of it. And but here we are in Genesis chapter number 30, and we've gone about halfway through this chapter. And Lord willing, we'll finish this chapter. We'll try to get through the next chapter as well. The next chapter is a lot of information, but there is a good application with it. But last week we saw a battle for affections. I believe that last week's sermon and just going through that passage was, for me, very helpful. A good reminder of the contentment needed for a home. You know, we need to find contentment in our homes, and we aren't going to find that in our spouse, in others, okay? That's kind of what we learned last week. They're fighting. Leah is trying to win the affections of Jacob, and Rachel is trying to have a child. And they're both trying to get from Jacob something, and they're not getting it, and they're frustrated and competitive over these things, and there's this battle that is raging. And in this battle, we saw both Leah and Rachel focus less and less on God. You know, when Leah her first time that she had a child, she praised the Lord for it. And by the time she had her 4th child, she seemed to even find contentment in that until Rachel had a child Bilhah had a child for Rachel. And once that happened, Leah's contentment went away, and her satisfaction with God went away. Her even mentioning of God went away. And we saw the fight going from being kind of like an elephant in the room to they're right out there talking about, they named their children after the argument, and then they even involved their children in the argument. When Reuben brings the mandrakes to Rachel receives, to Leah. Leah receives those and trades them to Rachel, and on the kind of case goes. And we saw people getting blamed in verse number 1. Rachel goes to Jacob and blames him for not having a child, and like it's Jacob's fault. And that's what happens in a home of discontentment. All these kinds of things happen, and people are blamed. Others who are innocent get involved, and we talked about how oftentimes in our homes, the collateral damage of the kids, and how often that can happen. And we found in the case of Leah, a flip-flopping of emotions based on conditions even, and we saw choices being made that were not in the best interest of the family for the sake of the individual's desires. And when we allow our hearts, our desires to lead our homes, these are the kind of issues that we're going to face. And so we've got to learn these lessons from the school of hard knocks that Jacob's family went through, and strive to learn to be content, not in our spouse or in others, but in God. And so today we're going to look at the lack of contentment found in stuff. And that's what I see here in this, from verse number 25 on. I see a battle for possessions. Look at Genesis chapter 30, and we're going to go through this just like we did last week. We'll read a passage, we'll talk about that couple verses, then we'll read a couple more verses and talk about those couple verses. That way, I don't feel like I've got to finish the passage, all right? And we can stop anywhere through this. So here we've got verse number 25. It says, "And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go into mine own country, and to my own place, and to my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service, which I have done thee. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I found favor in thine eyes, tarry. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake." So here Jacob, he wants to go back to his home, go back to Canaan, where he's supposed to be. That's where he's supposed to be at. And this is a good desire. This is a fulfilling of what was always intention. So Jacob's making the right move. He needs to get out of Laban's home. Laban has messed his family up enough, right? With the trading Leah and Rachel and using them as bargaining chips for a workman and all the things that he's done. And so Jacob's making the right move. And Laban says to him, but I've seen what God has done with you being in my house. He's blessed me. And that's what Jacob is going to be. His descendants, just like Abraham's descendants, are going to be a blessing to the whole world. Now, it's not just in reference to the Messiah, although it is greatly in reference to the Messiah, but also they're a blessing to those around them. Just we see that by Jacob. And so he says in verse 28, and he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. So this is the second time Laban said this to Jacob. Last time, he says, hey, you've been sticking around the house for a month now. You shouldn't be working around here for free, so what do you want? He says, I want Rachel. And what did Laban do? He tricked him. And now he says the same thing. What do you want? You know, what can I get you to have that you can stay? He says, appoint my wages, and I will give it. He hands him a blank check, right? Verse number 29, he said, in him thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hadst before I came, and is now increased unto a multitude, and Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now when shall I provide for mine own house also? So Jacob sees his family and makes a decision to return where he knows he should be. This was likely at the end of his 14 years of service, and the house of Laban is no place to raise a family. Finally, Jacob is taking charge. We talked last week about how there was such a lack of leadership. You know, all of the last chapter and a little bit spilling over into chapter number 29, it's Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah, they're battling and Jacob's hardly ever talked about. Jacob's not leading in his home like he should be. And now he's stepping up to that leadership, and then he's offered here a blank check, and he says, I've done right. Your house has been blessed. In verse 31, he said, what shall I give thee? And Jacob said, thou shalt not give me anything. If thou wilt do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep thy flock. I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come, when it shall come for my hire before thy face. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. So he makes him a deal. Give me all of the animals with blemishes. All the ones that, they've got spots and speckles, and they aren't pure bloods. They aren't all the same color. And that way, you can't say I've stolen anything from you, and anything that's not that's in my flocks, you'll know is not mine. And so very obvious dividing line, but I want you to notice how easily Jacob's attention, what did he want to do in verse 25? He wanted to go back to Canaan. Now what does he want to do? He wants all this stuff. He wants these cattle. He wants to leave with some possessions. But wait. I thought back at Bethel, he made a vow with God and that he was going to trust God for the things that he needed. And when God provided, he was going to make God his God. That was the vow that was made in Bethel. But now he's looking to leave Laban's house, and Laban offers him something, and his focus has changed. His focus is turning from, and I know the Bible doesn't explicitly say he's leaving because the state that his family is in. But Laban has not helped his family. So regardless of whether or not that was Jacob's intention, it is the right move for him. He needs to get out of Laban's pagan house. And his mind has been changed because his focus is no longer his family, it's on these possessions. And hadn't God provided for his grandfather? Hadn't God provided for his father? Of course he had. So why doesn't Jacob say, hey, Laban, I don't need your stuff. I've got a God who has promised to take care of me. And so look at verse number 34. It says, and Laban said, behold, I would it might be according to thy word. He says, done deal. All right, let's shake on it. But notice what he does here in the next verse, okay? This is Laban. He's shaking your hand here, and he's behind the back. He's doing something. Look at verse 35. He says, and he removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one of them that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hands of his sons. And he set 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So he said, hey, any of the ring-straight, any of those ones, they're mine. And so what does Laban do? All of those ones, I'm going to send one of my sons, and I'm going to take them 3 days away, so that you can't get any of them. They can't mate with any of the ones in my flock, so you're not going to very likely have any of those. You see Laban's idea here? Laban said, yeah, I'll do that, sure. But he's tricking Jacob once again. And the true intentions of Laban are revealed. Laban doesn't want Jacob to have anything. Laban just wants the blessings that come along with Jacob being in the house. Look at verse 36. And he set 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar and of hazel and chestnut tree, and pilled white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had pilled before the flocks in the gutters and the watering troughs when the flock came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks toward the ring-straked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by them, and he put them not unto Laban's cattle. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. And the man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and men servants, and camels, and donkeys. And so we have here this story of Jacob doing this kind of trick in order to make sure that and ensure that he has ring-straped, speckled, and spotted cattle and goats and sheep. And there's been all kinds of, I've read several commentaries throughout the past week and a half or so in preparation for this, or really two and a half weeks almost. And they all have different reasons why they think scientifically this might have worked, or this might be some kind of trick or something like that. And whether this is a trick or whether it's some kind of biological, phenomena, I don't know. But here's what I do know, and here's what Jacob eventually is going to recognize, because look at verse number 9 of chapter number 31. Well, actually, we back up to verse number 8. He says, if he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckle. And if he said thus, the ring-strake shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ring-strake. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. See, he recognized it's really God that did this. And whether or not this was some kind of trick that Jacob figured out or not, God is the one who's providing for Jacob. Verse 32 even says, 42 of Genesis 31 says, except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. God hath seen my affliction and labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. So he says there, hey, if it weren't for the God of my father, I'd have left here empty. So Jacob recognizes that it's God that does this, and may we also recognize that. I don't know if you could duplicate the same, because none of the commentators have said that scientists somehow duplicated this, okay? I don't know. Maybe there is some way that this could be duplicated, but it's not like anybody really cares what kind of cattle you have. This is a very unique situation. So what's the real point in trying to do? God's the one that did this. God is providing for Jacob. And so where should you and I, we see here a man who is making the right decision. He's getting out of a situation and away from a man who tricks, who schemes, who connives, who is a pagan. We're going to look at that in the next chapter. He does all of those things. He's getting out of his house. It was a good decision. But what distracted him from making that good decision? Stuff. So where should I find my contentment? Should I find it in my spouse? Or others? No. Should I find it in stuff? No. And we talked last week about the Apostle Paul saying that he had learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. And several verses later, he says, "But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus." Even a couple verses before that, it says, "I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me." It's God who is both the one who makes us able to be content and our object of contentment. He is the one we should seek after. And John 14, verse 8 and 9, we talked about how Philip saith unto him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it sufficeth us." Jesus saith unto him, "Have I been so long time with you, and yet hast thou not known me, Philip?" Philip says, Jesus, just show us God the Father, and we'll be fine. And so often you and I are the same way about God. God, if you just did this for me, if you just gave me that, I would be content. Well, we've got to be content with God. And it's not something that comes naturally. It's something we've got to learn and work on constantly. And especially, there's a danger of discontentment when it comes to our possessions. Look at 1 Timothy chapter number 6. We're going to turn to two passages. Look at this. But so often, you find in marriages and you find in families, people looking for happiness from somebody else, from their spouse, from their kids, from their grandkids, from their, from someone else in their family. And they're trying to find contentment in that. If they only did this for me, I would be happy. And we don't need to find contentment in somebody else. That's putting way too much pressure on that person. All of us are just sinners, and so are the people that you are trying to find contentment in. And they're going to disappoint you. They're going to fail you. And the same way goes with stuff. Look at 1 Timothy chapter number 6, verse number 3. It says, "If a man teach otherwise and consent not to wholesome words, even the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to the doctrine which is according to godliness, he is proud, knowing nothing, but doting about questions and strifes of words, whereof cometh envy, strife, railings, evil surmisings, perverse disputings of men, and corrupt minds, and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness, from such withdraw thyself." And this was apparently a teaching back in the times of the Apostle Paul, because he's warning Timothy about people who will teach that gain is godliness. In other words, if you love God, he'll give you the stuff you want. If you're doing right, then your pocketbook and your savings account and your size of your home and the quality of your car will show that. And that's not always the case. I mean, look at Job. I mean, at the end of Job's, yeah, sure, God blesses him. But man, right there in the middle of that book, most of the chapters of that book, Job is in suffering. He's in torment. He's in sorrow. Look at the life that Jesus told us about. He told us to take up our cross and follow him. But yet there's so many teachers and preachers that would say, if you follow God, everything good you could possibly want is going to head your way. Just send me a check in the mail, and you're going to get all kinds of blessings. It's seed money for some kind of blessing that God's going to give you. And God doesn't promise to just be, he's not like a little Easter bunny of the sky to just rain down things upon us. And so it says, but godliness with what? Contentment is great gain. Contentment. For we brought nothing into this world, and is certain we can carry nothing out. And then it tells us what we should be content with. Food and raiment, let us therewith be content. That's not much. The clothes on our backs and the food on our plates. And so if we have anything above that, let's rejoice. Let's rejoice. What does verse 9 says? But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and in many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And so you see here the danger of trusting in stuff. Now, does God say here that stuff is wrong? No. He doesn't say for money is the root of all evil. He says for the love of money is the root of all evil. I've seen people with money do amazing things with that money for the cause of Christ. And that should be the goal and desire of our lives to do so. To provide for our families, to leave an inheritance for our children. The Bible talks about that. And to give to God. That should be our goals in life. But that shouldn't be the driver of everything that we do. Should not be if there's a dollar sign behind it. Because if not, we're going to end up like Lot, right? We studied Lot not all that long ago, and Lot looked after the well-watered plains of Jordan, and next thing you know, he's in the middle of Sodom and Gomorrah because he made decisions based on his pocketbook. It's not wrong to have stuff. We're all going to have stuff. But is that stuff what drives us? Is that the focus? Is that what we're coveting? Do we see the stuff that we have? Do we look at that stuff and think, man, I got junk? And we look across the street and think, oh, man, I want that, and I want that, and I want that. But then it says, but thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. So the danger of trusting in your stuff. And it's, verse number 9 is so, but they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Look at this world around us and how true that statement is. And then turn to one other passage, Luke chapter number 12. Look at verse number 13. Jesus is confronted with a family problem. The reading, I've never really been to one reading of the will. It was a very tense moment, and there wasn't much stuff that was being divided up. And here, that's what's happening. There's a dividing going on, and one of the companies said unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. And he said unto him, Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? And he said unto them, Take heed, and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. We've got to recognize that the stuff that we have does not make up our lives. It's stuff. It's going to burn away. It's going to rot away. It's going to get stolen away. It's going to inflate away. All of those things. It's just stuff. And then he says, and he spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully, and he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? And he said, This will I do. I'll pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. God here does not fault this man for his possessions. God faults this man for what he does with his possessions. He has enough. He has more than enough. And so he decides, hey, you know what? I have so much stuff, I've got to build a bigger barn. And so instead of saying, hey, I'm going to use this stuff that I have, I've got more than enough, I'm going to use the stuff that I have for God, he builds a bigger barn. What is his focus on? Is his focus on God? No. His focus is on himself. And that's here the issue with this family that we've been reading about for the past chapter and a half. They're focusing on themselves and not on God. Their contentment is not found in themselves, or not found in God. It's found in other things. They're looking for their contentment in their spouse. They're looking for their contentment in their stuff. And they're lacking to see that God is enough. And we've got to get to that point. Because it's only in God where you and I can find contentment. I can covet all by myself. I don't need God's help for that. My eye is constantly catching things that I want, and I want this. But it's only with God's help that I can be content. I need him to help me in that. And so do you. Because, and here's the reason why we're dwelling so much on this. Because as I read over this passage and thought, I thought, man, look at the harm that they're doing to their family. The children that are being used in order to accomplish the affections of Jacob by Leah. and Leah and Rachel using Jacob in order to fulfill her wishes. And then you've got Jacob, who decides that he's supposed to do something, but instead of doing the right thing, he instead goes after more stuff. And the things that need to happen in this family are set aside because of discontentment. Discontentment can hurt our homes in so many ways. It's a dangerous thing. And it's especially dangerous in a day and age where you can't go anywhere without corporate America trying to get us to be discontent. Right? You can't drive down the highway without seeing people advertising items for you to purchase. You can't watch television without the devil wants us to be in a state of discontentment because he sees and he knows the chaos that it happens in our home. I bet if I were to ask you to list the 10 commandments, and I bet probably, if we did this with a large group of people, I bet the most often forgot commandment is thou shalt not covet. Because we see it as such a small thing. Oh, it's no big deal for me to desire that, and for me to want that, for me to try to live for that. And we don't realize the toll that it takes on our homes. Turn back to Genesis chapter number 31. We're finished up with chapter 30. Now we're at chapter 31. And this is kind of another chapter of reaping. I think as we look at this chapter, we see Jacob once again reaping the things that he sowed. The discontentment that is happening in chapters 29 and 30 sows lying, it sows stealing, it sows a separated family. And so look at verse number 1. And we discussed lack of Jacob in the last chapter when the women were feuding. And of course, we saw his decision to remain. That decision was not based on the spiritual needs of his family, but the material desires for his future. He didn't decide to stay in Laban's home because it was good for his kids and his wife. He decided to stay in Laban's home because it had stuff. And now we embark another adventure of repercussions of past decisions. And he heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's. And that which was our father's hath he gotten all of this glory. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. And the Lord said unto Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. So Jacob sees that Laban's not happy with him. Laban agreed to this deal, and he even tried to make sure that the deal didn't do Jacob any good, but it did. And so now he doesn't see Jacob in the same way, because Laban didn't want to actually give Jacob anything. He just wanted the blessings that came with Jacob. And yet, despite Jacob's deceitfulness, despite Jacob's lack of leadership, despite Jacob's discontentment, who shows up in verse 3? God. Isn't that amazing? Jacob, I don't think any of us, if we were to say, hey, who do you most want to be like in the Bible? I don't think any of us would say Jacob. Maybe if we polled enough people, somebody would say Jacob. Jacob toward the end of his life, maybe, you might find some admirable things in, but up till now, there hasn't really been a whole lot of admiration that you can find for Jacob. I don't want to be like Jacob so far. And yet, God still comes to him. Isn't that awesome? It shows that God is not just a rewarder of those that do good. God is a keeper of his promises. He's not coming to Jacob because Jacob is doing the right things. He's coming to Jacob because he has promised Jacob some things. He's promised that he would take care of Jacob. Look at verse number 4. Not just Jacob, but to Abraham and to Isaac. But look at verse 4. It says, and Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And you know that with all my power I have served your father, and your father hath deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he said thus, the ringstraked shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ringstraked. Then thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. I didn't turn my own phone on silent today. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up mine eyes and saw in a dream, behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-straped, speckled, and gristled. And so we see the change of countenance. We see Jacob speaking to his wives, and he notices other people's dislike of him. That's what he points out first. The change of the countenance. Hey, Laban, your dad, he doesn't look at me the same way. His actions towards me are not as they were before. Things are changing in our relationship. But notice that he acknowledged God's protection. So he says, I see your father's countenance, and then look at what he says at the end. But the God of my father hath been with me. I don't know what you're facing today. I don't know if there's someone in your life that is against you. Somebody talked to me this past week about some issues with their job where it seems like a manager at their work is against them. But maybe recognize that God is with us. And so for Jacob to recognize, hey, this over here, Laban's not liking me, but God is with me. May we remember that in each and every of our issues as well. And then he talks about the deceitfulness of Laban. He says, your father hath deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But then he says, but God. Once again, a flip of the coin. Here's the bad. Someone's being deceitful. Someone's lying. But God is protecting. So we see both God's protection, but then also God's provision. Despite this lying that Laban is doing, God provides for Jacob. And notice, though, also as well, that in all of this, Jacob never acknowledges the sins of his past. So far, I probably needed to look through this maybe a little better, but I haven't found a spot so far in my study of Jacob where he acknowledges, man, all these people are doing wrong by me. Laban's not treating me right, but I was pretty mean to Esau. I lied to my dad. I did all, he never acknowledges the sins of his past. And then we're going to finish up here with these next couple verses here, and we'll do the rest of this chapter next week, I think. Because like I said, although it's a lot of information here and a little application, I still think we need to take some time with it. So look at verse 10. It says, and it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived that I lifted up mine eyes and saw in a dream, behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-straped, speckled, and gristled. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And he said, Lift up now thine eyes, and see all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ring-straped, speckled, and gristled. For I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise. Get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. The miracle of the cattle, like I said before, was not a feat of Jacob's ingenuity. It was a feature of God's blessing. It was a feature of God's promise. God promised that he would take care of Jacob. And Jacob is acknowledged, he sees in this dream that all of the animals that were mating were ring-straped, speckled, and gristled. But those weren't the animals that were mating, because he took those animals away. But God is saying it was as if I made them like that. He's showing them that dream. So God provided for him in that way. And then in verse number 13, he says, I am the God of Bethel. Bethel, the house of God. That's what Jacob named that place where he laid down to sleep when he was on the run. And that's when he saw that God cares. That's where he saw Jacob's ladder, right? Angels descending and ascending, a God that is not just a creator God, but he cares about his creation. And Jacob sees that. Jacob sees that he's a personal God. And the God of Bethel is the one who cares about the affairs of man. He's the one who speaks to Jacob. He's the one that confronts Jacob. He comes to Jacob. And he's the one that provides for Jacob. And he's the one, by the way, that Jacob chose. Look back at this interaction in Bethel, chapter 28. He says, I am the God of Bethel, the one to whom that you vowed a vow. And he says, and Jacob vowed a vow, saying, it will be, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. See, he's already acknowledged that God was with him. He said that when he was speaking to his wives. He said, hey, Laban, his countenance has changed, but my God is with me. That was the first part of the promise the vow that was made there. And the second part, he said, Laban's tricked me, but God has provided for me. And that was the second part of the vow. The third part of the vow is that he comes back to his father's house, which Jacob should have already done anyway. But he hasn't. And he's going to do it. We'll study it next week, Lord willing. And next week he goes there, and he doesn't go there the way that he wants to. It's Jacob on the run, part 2. That's what next this chapter is. And he's the one, look at verse 22. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. He makes God his God, and he decides to give God a part of the things that God has blessed him with. Can I tell you, that's one of the greatest ways to lose our discontentment. You know, I believe that's why God gives it. God doesn't need our tithe. God doesn't need our money. God doesn't need our stuff. But when we do give God of the things that we have, we're acknowledging that all of it's his anyway. And it's an opportunity to give back. And so if there's discontentment that's running rampant in your house, and it has to do with that green stuff that's got a bunch of presidents' faces on it, and one guy that wrote an almanac, Ben Franklin, that stuff, if that's the thing that you're so discontented over, a great remedy for that is the tithe. But we've got to watch the discontentment of ourselves, because it affects those around us, and it wreaks havoc in our homes. And in our day and age where we've been so blessed, we have so much, may we not allow that stuff to control us. May we not allow it to have our heart. God should have our heart. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all you've given to us. And Lord, these lessons from the life of Jacob and his family. And Lord, help us as we continue through this, that we would glean something from your word each and every week. Lord, these are such familiar stories and passages. But Lord, may we make them new every week. And Lord, ask that you would open our eyes and reveal wonderful things out of your word each and every time that it's opened. Lord, help me as I study and prepare, that you'd guide me and give me the things that not just I need, but that our church needs as well. And Lord, help us to have strong families through being content with you, and not allowing our focuses to be on other things that we desire, but our focus to be on you, and our families will be much stronger, much healthier, much more aligned with things. And Lord, as we look at the repercussions of some of the things that Jacob has sown in his family, may we see the damage that's done and not allow it to happen in our own homes. And we ask all these things in